In 2018, archaeologists in the Peruvian Andes opened a 9,000-year-old grave. Inside was a skeleton. Beside it, laid out with care, was a hunting kit, spear points, cutting blades, tools for skinning and butchering large animals. The team didn't even question it. They wrote it down as a male hunter. That's what the evidence said. That's what every textbook said. Then they ran the lab work. The bones belonged to a woman, somewhere between 17 and 19 years old, buried with the gear of a big game hunter. And once researchers went back and checked other burials across the Americas, they found the same pattern again and again. If trained scientists with lab equipment got this wrong on bones they could literally test, how did people 9,000 years ago with nothing but their eyes figure out who was who? That question goes deeper than you think, and the answer is stranger than you'd expect. Hit subscribe before we keep going. Most of us assume ancient gender categories worked exactly like we imagine ours do. Strict, binary, assigned at birth, and locked in forever. But that assumption says more about us than it does about them. In a lot of ancient societies, gender wasn't primarily a biological label. It was a role, a function, a position you held within the group, and in some cultures, that position could shift depending on what you did, not what you were born as. And here's the part that gets stranger. In some places, a person's recognized gender could actually change during their life, depending on the work they took on, the rituals they performed, or the role the community needed them to fill. That's not a modern idea being projected backward. That's what the evidence shows. Let's go back to that burial in Peru. Researchers didn't stop at one skeleton. They went through records of similar graves across North and South America, burials containing big game hunting tools. They found 27 of them. 11 were female. Based on that ratio, researchers estimate that somewhere between 30 and 50% of Ice Age big game hunters in the Americas may have been women, not an exception. Possibly half the workforce. Now go north, to Sweden, to a Viking grave known as BJ 581. This grave was excavated in 1878. It contained a sword, an axe, a spear, armor-piercing arrows, 2 shields, and the remains of 2 horses. For 139 years, this was the textbook example of a high-ranking Viking warrior. Every illustration, every museum description, every assumption. Then in 2017, DNA sequencing was run on the bones. 2 X chromosomes, no Y. The warrior was a woman. But here's the strangest part, and it's not the weapons. When researchers looked closer, this grave was missing something almost every other female burial from that era contained. No textile tools, no jewelry typically associated with domestic female roles. Nothing that said this person's identity was secondary to their role. What was buried with her wasn't a contradiction. It was a statement. Now go back further. To ancient Mesopotamia, roughly 4,000 years ago, the goddess Inanna, also known as Ishtar, was one of the most powerful deities in the region, and one of her defining powers, according to the myths themselves, was the ability to transform men into women and women into men. But the myth doesn't stop there. According to the texts, the god Enki created a group of beings specifically described as neither male nor female. These beings became Inanna's personal clergy, priests known as gala and assinnu. This wasn't a side detail. This wasn't whispered about or hidden. These priests held recognized religious roles, performed sacred rituals, and were considered essential to temple life. A similar pattern shows up across the ancient world. The galley priests of the goddess Cybele, active across Anatolia and later Rome. The Hijra tradition in South Asia, referenced in texts going back over 2,000 years. Different regions, different gods, same underlying idea. A third category with a function, a name, and a place. So if there was no DNA test, no chromosome chart, no medical exam at birth, how did ancient communities actually sort this out? The honest answer is slowly and socially. Division of labor was one marker, what tasks a person consistently performed over years. Reproductive role was another, visible eventually through childbirth, but not used as the sole determining factor at birth the way we might assume. And then there's the marker almost no one expects. In several cultures with recognized third gender roles, one of the clearest signals wasn't appearance, it was speech. Specific dialects, specific ritual languages were reserved for certain genders to use in ceremonial contexts. Who was allowed to speak, and in what register, told the community who someone was, as much as anything else did. Gender, in this framework, wasn't something declared once. It was something demonstrated, recognized, and confirmed by the community over time. Eventually, though, humans did start marking gender visually, deliberately, on purpose, as a signal. Clothing, hairstyles, body adornment, burial goods chosen specifically to broadcast identity to anyone looking. And one of the oldest known examples of this kind of deliberate gender signaling isn't a weapon, and it isn't a tool. It's a small piece of jewelry found in a burial site, initially cataloged as unremarkable, almost overlooked entirely. entirely. Only later did researchers realize what it represented. One of the earliest physical objects ever created specifically to say to anyone who saw it, "This is who I am." That's the moment gender stops being something only observed and starts being something worn. It's worth pausing on one thing before we close. For all this historical complexity, roles that shifted, categories that expanded, identities that were built rather than assumed, modern gender inequality is still very measurable today. Pay gaps, representation gaps, access gaps that vary widely depending on where in the world you're standing. Whatever conclusions people draw from the history, and there are a lot of different ones, the numbers themselves aren't really up for debate. They're just there, sitting in plain sight in nearly every country's labor data. Make of that what you will. A 9,000-year-old grave, a skeleton, a hunting kit beside it that didn't match the assumption. That mismatch wasn't an error in the data. It was a clue the data had been trying to tell us all along. For most of human history, gender wasn't a box checked once and forgotten. It was a role, observed, performed, sometimes reassigned, sometimes expanded into categories we don't even have clean words for today. The rigid lines we treat as ancient, as natural, as obvious, turn out to be neither. And the next time someone tells you it's always been simple, remember the woman buried with the spear. Here's something that changes the entire framing of everything we've covered so far. Everything up to this point, the burials, the priests, the third categories, you could file away as ancient history. Something that existed, then disappeared, replaced by simpler categories over time. Except it didn't disappear everywhere. On the island of Sulawesi, in Indonesia, there's a group called the Bugis, and for centuries, their culture has recognized not 2 genders, not 3, but 5. There's makunrai, women, orowane, men, kalalai, women who take on roles traditionally associated with men, kalabai, men who take on roles traditionally associated with women. And then there's the 5th, bisu. According to Bugis belief, the bisu aren't simply between genders. They're described as embodying all of them at once. A complete being, considered closer to the divine because of it. For centuries, Bisu held real institutional power. They lived inside royal palaces. They served as advisors to kings. They were considered essential to the spiritual functioning of the kingdom. Not tolerated, not accommodated, essential. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This isn't a story from a clay tablet or a skeleton in the ground. There are Bisu alive right now. Fewer than 40 remain across South Sulawesi. Decades of political and religious upheaval pushed many of them into hiding. Some were targeted, some forced to abandon the role entirely. But the tradition held on. Every planting season, in a ritual called Mapalili, the remaining Bisu still walk barefoot to the rice fields,